Hi there. So this video is going to be a short summary of what happened this last Sunday because a bunch of students couldn't come into our final session of the Intro to Drawing class, and I couldn't actually log on to the regular Zoom session through North Van Arts because somehow Zoom was acting funny and it wouldn't recognize my IP address and wanted me to log in uh, through the administrator account, which I couldn't do. So sorry for that. It's just one of those technical challenges, and I've made North Van Arts aware so that we try to have some kind of backup plan for when a teacher on the weekend can't get into the class. So I ran it on the class on my own account, but I couldn't make a recording. So I'm just doing this as a gesture of help for the students who did come and who couldn't also come. So just to summarize what we covered, I sent out a bunch of documents that hopefully will help you, and I'm just going to go through them. This is from one of Andrew Loomis's books on how to draw, and he was not the first one to come up with these general proportions. This goes back to the time of Leonardo da Vinci and even before, but Andrew Loomis is probably the most well-known in the 21st century to 20th century to put these general proportions down on paper. And of course, these don't apply to everybody. Different genders, different races, different age groups will have different proportions, but they're just a general rule of thumb, okay? So you start out by drawing an upside down egg shape, and I do this with every single face that I draw just so I can get it placed in the center. Not that every composition has to have a head dead center in the page, but that's often my default because I might want to just do the whole thing and have enough room for it to kind of fit without being crowded. And it's fine for beginners just to place it dead center. And I have this upside down egg shape that has kind of corners here for the jawline and corners here for the skull, because you'll notice that the top is not a perfect circle, right? It's a little bit flat on the top, a little bit flat on the sides. Okay, the eye line is halfway down from the top to the bottom, and a lot of beginners don't realize this because they will make the top half of the head too short. So they'll put the top of the head like right here or something. But if you look at yourself in the mirror, like say if you hold up a pencil with your arm completely extended, and then you line up the end of the pencil with your eyes, and you put your thumb at your chin height and then move it upwards, then you'll notice that your eyes are somewhere about half the distance from the top to the bottom. And then the head itself is roughly 5 eye widths apart, with the eyes landing somewhere in the second and fourth slot, as it were. And the nose, roughly, the sides of the nose roughly line up with the inside of the eyes. Maybe it's a little bit wider on some people. And then the bottom of the nose is about halfway down from the eye line to the bottom of the chin. So if you divide the vertical height into quarters, then the bottom of the nose is somewhere at the 3/4 mark, and the eye line and the bottom nose roughly line up with the ears. So, and everything generally is symmetrical. We know that a lot of people have one eye slightly higher than another or slightly farther in, but these are general guidelines. And then you'll see how the mouth is a little bit wider than the nose. And the 1/8 mark, so if you divide the last quarter into half, it falls somewhere about the top of the chin below the mouth, okay? With the profile, we didn't cover that. I'm going to cover that in my the next class, which is the 6-week Intro to Portrait Drawing. And the thing that a lot of students might get wrong with the side profile is that the back of the head sometimes gets underprivileged, just like the forehead up here. So some beginner students might make the back of the head too short, or they make the side of the head between the face and the ears not long enough either. So you can see how then in this diagram there's like a nearly perfect circle that fits inside there, but her cranium kind of sticks out like this, and it's not exactly the same right here, but you more or less have a perfect circle here with this jaw attached to it, and the center point of the circle is just slightly above the ears, justified to the front. Okay, and this is the 3/4 profile. The proportions vertically, of course, are going to match. So if you wanted to do this diagram side by side, then those proportions should line up vertically, right? And the side profile is probably, or the 3/4 angle is probably my favorite to draw because it's the most dynamic and it just captures the whole face like a volume, right? It's a little bit more challenging to show the three-dimensionality of the face in this view and this view, but you definitely see it in this view. Okay, this image I sent out is the Loomis head, and it breaks down the head into a sphere with this kind of wedge attached to it. So if you imagine taking away the whole features of the face, this basically looks like the Iron Man kind of mask, which is or the helmet, which is a kind of a useful idea to simplify the entire head shape into this kind of featureless object that has kind of a sphere at the top and this wedge attached to the bottom. So the Loomis head also imagines that if you have this sphere and you have a circle in the side that you sliced off so that it's not a total sphere, because the side of the head minus the ear is relatively flat, right? So if you drew a head with as a perfect sphere, it would look weird, right? Cartoony. And so in the Loomis head, you have the sphere with the side chopped off, and then you have this wedge attached to it that creates the jaw. And looking at these different images, you can see how that shape changes in terms of how you draw it, depending on if it's looking up or looking down. But looking through these hopefully will help you gain a feeling of it as a sculptural form twisting in space. And the lines that are going across the face that show where the eye line is and the nose and the mouth, they wrap around the head parallel to each other, and that relationship stays exactly the same whether it's looking up or looking down. Okay. In this picture, you've also by Loomis, you've got the head inside a giant building, or a giant head inside a building, just to illustrate how those relationships across the symmetrical parts of the face. You've got a brow and the top of the forehead, across the cheekbones, across the mouth. They behave the same way as the floors of a building in terms of how the perspective lines converge into space, illusionistic space, because even though a head is a more complex shape than a big box, but it but according to the rules of illusionistic perspective, it still follows those same guidelines where these lines all converge as you go backwards in space. And here are some views of how that relationship stays consistent if you move the camera or the viewer lower or higher. Okay, and here they've kind of simplified it into a bunch of blocks. All right, next picture is this one. Shading is not the most important goal for the first part of the first introduction to drawing the portrait. Shading is kind of, once you get the proportions right, that's then, and you understand how the face shapes are built and attached to each other and how they move around as the head twists, then shading would be the next step. And this follows the same rules that we've looked at with shading a sphere. You have light coming from the right hand side in this case, and right there it hits it comes across a point where it makes the minimum amount of reflection and goes past, and then that shadow area is by extension the darkest. Okay, and then this shadow area is lighter and wider than this shadow area because Dylan, I'm shooting a video. Okay, I need to be here. Sorry, my son interrupted me. Okay, kids. And so the light's coming past, and this surface area is, you know that this surface area here is the least flat compared to this surface area. So that shadow area is so much more condensed. The area where the light is making the least amount of reflection towards you. And then it goes past, bounces off other surfaces, and then comes back here, and then you have like the strong reflected light here and there, a little bit there. So definitely here and here, even on the shirt. So the relationship is the same everywhere, where the light comes across here, you have shadow area, reflected light underneath, even on the cigarette. So it's everywhere. But this is a nice photo because it really shows the sculptural nature of his lower eyelids and his cheeks and jowls, even this little area underneath the nose. So this is would be a good one to practice for both proportions and lighting. Okay. Feel free to stop the video at any point and practice copying from any of these images that I've sent out. Okay, then the next thing we did was we did a page of squares. So I told the students, imagine you have a cube and it's spinning through space and you're trying to draw it from different angles. And keeping in mind that if you're looking at the cube from the underside and from the left-hand side, then try to make sure that these lines converge in space, following the laws of perspective, even if it's just a little bit, right? So this one would go that way, and this one would go that way, and that one would go that way, roughly like that. So they slightly taper as they go up, because this point is farther away from you than this point, and this point is farther away from you than this point. Okay. So I had students do that, trying to just practice thinking of this as a sculptural object that is, you know, in the round, as they say in sculpture. It's a thing that has volume, and you imagine that you're standing in front of it and you could pick it up and it has this mass to it, right? Then we did a face just from my imagination, and I didn't know if it was going to be male or female. Didn't really matter, because when I'm just sketching out of my imagination, I just let it, as I know that I'll get the proportions correct enough to look like a believable person, but I kind of allow a certain amount of unpredictability, and sometimes I'm surprised by what the person will look like. When I'm looking at this right now, I feel his eyes are just a slightly bit big and slightly close together, but since there's so much variation from one person to the next, maybe this person really does exist. This one eye is slightly higher than the other. A lot of people look like that. Okay, I established the upside down egg, and I did the really rough light construction lines like I always talked about. You can still see some of them underneath. And then I drew a vertical line down the middle and a horizontal line across the center, and started filling in the eyes. And then cut this distance in half for the bottom of the nose. That lines up where the eyes are going to go. The neck, I haven't talked about that much, but there's a mass here and a mass here, where you don't draw like a solid line around those muscle groups, but you kind of suggest it through shading. And on the one side, since his head is slightly turned this way, I will draw this line here, but I don't always do it on both sides, unless they're really jacked, right? And yeah, for somebody with an average neck, it usually starts just inward of the jawline a little bit. The mouth is kind of an upside, or like kind of stretched out M shape on the top, and a stretched out W shape, like a fat W shape on the bottom. And I did a tutorial on an eye and an ear. So this is kind of a blow up of the eye on the left one. So that person's right eye. It's fatter on the inside and pointier on the left side. So it tapers down like this. Left, meaning outside, closer to the ear. And then you have like this pocket on the inside where like dirt and tears collect. And I don't always draw a very hard line all the way across, because you can suggest things without having to connect them. You don't always see an eyelid on the very top, because sometimes it's just shaded in. Some people have very deep set eyes. So for this person, I made it a solid line with some shading like this. And the lower eyelid has just like this kind of pad of muscle that I don't always draw a solid line across either. It's likely to have like a little darker on this side where it starts, and then it just gets kind of more gradated, right? It's like might have a harder line here, and then it just fades out on this side. So look at your own in the mirror and see what yours looks like if you've never really studied it. Eyelashes go kind of like this. They kind of come out from the upper eyelid, which kind of goes on top. It folds down over the lower eyelid. So eyelashes go like this. Obviously, men and women have them, but definitely in cartoons, the men's eyelashes are underemphasized. And the lower eyelashes, you can actually see like this separation of skin where the roots come out, and then where the eyeball begins. The upper eyelid covers part of the eye, but oftentimes you can almost see the entire bottom of the arc of the eye, the pupil. And this is just how I shade it. I always put a catch light in the middle. big black circle, but the little reflection that makes it feel glossy covers up the iris, and then you have this colored area, which I always do with just radiating lines coming from the outside to the inside. And I shade the top darker than the bottom because I know that if the light is usually coming from the up high, then the upper eyelid and the eyebrows cast a bit of shadow on this area. The eyelashes and the eyelid will cast a bit of shadow, so I make the top part of the eye when I'm coloring it in almost as dark as the iris itself. Obviously, if somebody's got blue eyes, then this might be brighter, but I don't concern myself too much with that in a black and white drawing. The eyebrows go like this. Everybody's looks a little bit differently. Some people pluck, some people are hairier, but the direction at which they grow is the same on everyone. You have like this mass that comes here, like this, and then like that, right? It's almost like two straight lines. Some people, it's more curved, but then the top grows this way from up high towards the inside diagonally, and then the bottom ones grow in the opposite direction. So from the bottom right to the upper left into the middle. And then they kind of go in that direction to wick sweat away from going into the eye. Okay, I don't have a formula to break down the ear. This is just the basic shape. They keep growing your whole life just like your nose, so that's why older people might have bigger nose or bigger ears. And this is just a shape that